Oh crap!
Hey guys, I'm Prodigy from Airsoft Team Kilo 23. Welcome back to another episode of Inside the Mechbox. Today we're going to be working on a gun from one of my favorite Airsoft companies, ICS. Now we're going to be upgrading this ICS M4 A1 RIS. Now, we're going to install an upper gearbox in it. This is the M120 m120 upper gearbox. It's basically a full upgrade kit. You assemble it and stick it in your gun. Now, if you didn't know this before, the ICS M4 series is very different from any other M4 series because it has a two-piece gearbox. Now you can just pop the rear pin out, flip it open like a real M4, take the upper gearbox out sort of like a real gun bolt, and pop your new upper gearbox in. Now, the advantage this gives you is that you can swap your FPS, your performance, your internals out in under like 25-30 seconds. It's really easy. Now, the main upgrades this kit offers is an aluminum piston, a bearing spring guide, and an M120 spring, which should get you a pretty good boost in FPS from the stock platform. Now, all you have to do is assemble this and stick it in your gun. You can go from CQB at the stock FPS of about 320 to 340 or so to an outdoor FPS of about 400 or so. So this is a really great advantage to have in an airsoft gun like the ICS M4. Now this runs for about $60 at airsplat.com. If you guys are interested in this, go to airsplat.com, check it out. Now what we're going to do is assemble this. I'll show you guys how to assemble it. We'll check out every little part in detail, and I'll go over all the things you need to know to get this in your gun working. Now, let's take a closer look at this upgrade kit. It comes with everything you're going to need to install it in your ICS M4. So let's look at every part individually and actually zoom in on it and look at all the differences between the stock parts and the upgrade parts, if there are any. Now, the M120 spring is actually really stiff. I wouldn't be surprised if it were an M130 spring, actually. So this is going to get you a pretty significantly higher FPS. This also comes with the upper gearbox shell. Actually, this thing is really sharp, so either be careful with it when you're installing it, or file all the edges down. Now, like everything is sharp in here. All these corners are sharp, the edges on the cylinder assembly there are sharp, so just make sure you don't cut yourself. I know I've cut myself numerous times on this and it doesn't feel good. It's like a bad paper cut. The piston, like I said earlier, is an aluminum piston, so this should last you a lot longer than the stock plastic piston. The piston head is not ported and it's obviously dry like everything else in here. It's not going to have any grease on it at all. You're going to have to grease it yourself. The O-ring does feel pretty good, so that should get you a good air seal. The plastic cylinder head is exactly like the stock one, so there's no upgrading here at all. The cylinder also is identical to the stock cylinder, no upgrade here. Just remember, you can only use this kit with M4 series guns. If you want to use it in an M16, you're going to have to get a full cylinder instead of the M4 Type 1 cylinder. The tappet plate is nothing special, but it is pretty flexible, so I'd imagine this one will last you quite a while. The bearing spring guide has pretty nice bearings on it, as I'd come to expect from ICS, and it does have a full metal shaft on it, so that improves your durability. It also does have a full hole that runs all the way through it, so you can actually install this pretty easily. The air nozzle is just like the stock one. It doesn't have any internal O-ring, which is pretty normal for ICS. They don't put internal O-rings in their nozzles. And finally, you get all the screws necessary to assemble the upper gearbox shell. So this is a plus. You also get your little tappet plate spring in here, so you don't have to go find a spare one. So for a lubricant in this, I'm going to be using ICS general purpose grease. It says gear grease on here, but you can use it for just about anything. I find it gets a good air seal in a cylinder, and really it's just general purpose grease. You can use it in anything. So first, let's start with your upper gearbox shell here. You can go ahead and remove the right side of it. So we're just going to be working with the left side of the shell for a little bit. So first things first, go ahead and take your cylinder and cylinder head. You got these. Go ahead and grease your O-ring a little bit, put some lubricant on that. Just kind of smear it around with your fingers. Then you can slide it inside the cylinder. Now the cylinder and cylinder head get a really tight seal together, so you're going to get 0 FPS leak between these two parts here. Next up, you can take your air nozzle, slide that on the end here. And a lot of people advise against this, but I actually promote it. You should spray a little bit into the nozzle there and move it around so it gets spread out. Now this will shoot a little bit of cylinder grease through your hop-up, but that can be a good thing. It can lubricate your bucking, which can in turn help with the air seal. So I think this is a good thing to do. Next up, take your tappet plate, put that on the bottom of this, and go ahead and roll it into the upper gearbox shell like so. Make sure it's flush with the other side of it like this, and everything moves pretty freely. Now you can go ahead and take your tappet plate spring, attach that to the little hook there on the tappet plate, and take needleless pliers and connect it to the small rod right here. This is how the tappet plate and tappet plate spring should look if you've never seen one before. Make sure your tappet plate does in fact spring forward when pushed back. Now you're going to want to make sure the guides for the piston are well lubricated so that it does not have any resistance on it and it moves pretty freely without any noise. So go ahead and spray a little bit of grease here. Just remember that too much grease just makes a mess. It's not really going to help. Now you can take your piston and piston head. The piston head should already be attached to it and, as I said before, has no ports. So if you want to replace your piston head, I say go for it. I personally like ported piston heads, but non-ported in this case works just fine. Now it does not have any bearings, so it's attached via a small nut in the back here. So don't worry about the bearings, those are fine. All you need to do is lubricate the O-ring so it gets a good air seal with the cylinder. Now you can slide your piston and piston head into the cylinder. Make sure you're getting a good air seal there. Also make sure your piston is correctly on its tracks right there. If it's not, your gearbox shell will not assemble correctly and you could potentially strip your piston if you put it in your gun and shoot it. Now you really don't have to worry about your engagement angle with your piston, mainly because this is all the same brand. Assuming your gears are still stock, everything should work just fine. Now the final step is installing your spring and spring guide. Now make sure the coiled sections are facing the back toward the spring guide, like so. If you put them up front at the piston, it's just not going to work as well. Now I'm going to take my guide rod here so that I can easily install it. Now this is a pretty long spring. It may take some work to install. Make sure everything is situated correctly, and you might want to press your cylinder down so that it doesn't go flying. Now with the right side of your gearbox shell installed, you can go ahead and install all the necessary screws. Now once all your screws are installed, don't forget to install your spring guide screw. That way your spring guide's not going to wobble around while the spring is being retracted each time. Alright, let's go ahead and test the FPS of the ICS M4 RIS. Everything is 100% stock in this gun. Now I'm going to be using 0.25 grams to chrono this gun. Even though people usually use 0.2s to chrono guns, I tend to use 0.25s, just because it gives me a more accurate sense of what my gun will be shooting on the field. I personally use 0.25 grams in all of my guns. So that's what my gun is going to chrono at with 2.5s. Let's get to it. That's pretty good. It's shooting between about 310 to 320 with 2.5s. So you can imagine it's shooting about 340 to 350 with 0.2s. Now swapping out the upper gearbox in the ICS M4 could not be simpler. Simply pop out the rear pin here. You might need a small screwdriver or something to do it. Sometimes it can get a little stiff. Now that the rear pin has been removed, you can go ahead and break open your ICS M4, just like the real thing. Extract the upper gearbox. Here's the stock upper gearbox. Now here we have the upgraded M120 gearbox. You can tell by the black piston in there instead of the white one. Now installing it is really easy. You may need to kind of work it in. If your gearbox shell is new, like this one, you may need a little bit of work, but it does fit. Then you just close the receiver like so, and pop the pin in the other side. You're ready to go. Now we have the ICS M120 upper gearbox installed, still using .25 gram rounds. Now that's shooting pretty hot right there, about 380 to 400 feet per second. This thing is getting a really good air seal. Now, because we're using 2.5s, you can add about 30 or 40 FPS to what this chrono is getting to get the FPS with .2s. So you can imagine this gun shoots about 380 to 400 with 2.5s. It's going to shoot about 420 to 440 with .2s. So I'd venture to say that this is about an M125-ish spring, not an M120. This thing is getting a great air seal. I'm really happy with it. It's an awesome little setup here, the ICS M4 is. You're able to switch out upper gearboxes in under 30 seconds and get your gun back together and set up for either a CQB or outdoor setup. Now, I personally love being able to swap out half the internals of my gun in under 30 seconds. It's a great deal for this upper gearbox, $60 at airsplat.com. Check them out, just awesome. It's a part I can really recommend to anyone who owns an ICS M4. Really versatile gun. This upgrade just makes it a little better. I'm Prodigy from Airsoft Team Kilo 23, signing off.